Thank you for joining today. I am Ryan Neiman, SDR Sports District Radio. Follow us on Twitter at SDistrict Radio. We are on the web at sportsu.com. Like us on Facebook at Sports District Radio. I am Ryan Neiman. This is Sports Talk with an Edge. Thanks again for joining today. The NBA playoffs continued last night as the Indiana Pacers squeaked by the Miami Heat to force a Game 6. But before we talk about anything in the NBA playoffs, the NBA draft is June 26th, and we found out a couple weeks back who will hold that number one draft pick, as we'll go yet again to the Cleveland Cavaliers. However, if we turn the clock back to 1966, the system that was implemented of how the draft picks were selected, and even though it might sound rather comical today, is they would use a coin flip between the worst teams in each division to determine who would obtain the first overall pick. If you go even further back before 1966, they used territorial picks where they allowed teams to draft a player from its local area, and draft slots were determined in reverse order of their win-loss record. But in 1984, amongst controversy, the NBA finally introduced the lottery system, and it has stayed that way with some changes ever since. Talking about the NBA lottery, how it became, and why it is somewhat illegal with the NBA lottery, is award-winning sports writer and journalist Evan Weiner is joining us right now. How are you doing today, Evan?
Oh, not bad. Yourself?
Doing excellent. As I mentioned, the NBA draft is June 26th. And for nearly 20 years, the draft order in 1966 was not changed until 1984. Why did this all change for the NBA lottery?
Well, if you remember, because I was there, Houston was awful. They were absolutely awful, and there were some people who discussed that they were tanking the season. Patterson, I believe it was Ray Patterson, was the GM of Houston, and there were two coin flips back then, and they got Akeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson back to back. And if you remember the time, that time around the NBA was not what it is today. They were struggling. They would come up with the drug agreement salary cap, which literally saved 7 teams from going under. They were about ready to go from 23 teams to 16 teams. There were rumors that Denver and Utah were going to combine, Cleveland and Indianapolis were going to combine, and some teams would just drop out. So they came up with this gizmo, the draft lottery, to basically make sure that teams didn't dive and didn't try to get into the last two spots to have the coin flip. And, that coin flip over the years was significant. Back, I believe it was 68 when Lou Alcindor came out. Maybe it was 69. I guess it was 69. There was the coin flip between the Phoenix Suns and the Milwaukee Bucks. And Lou Alcindor ended up with the Milwaukee Bucks, and Neil Walk ended up with the Phoenix Suns. And I'm going to give you a backstory there. And this is how the league made it up to Phoenix for losing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, known in those days as Lou Alcindor. My friend Shelley Saltman was one of the minority owners of the Phoenix Suns at the time, and Phoenix was devastated because they felt if they won the coin flip, they would have had Lou Alcindor and they would have been a contender for many, many years. And as it turned out, Lou won a championship as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in Milwaukee when they got Oscar Robertson. And Phoenix was beside itself. And Connie Hawkins was in the American Basketball Association. Connie Hawkins was one of the greatest players ever to come out of Brooklyn, the streets of Brooklyn. He went to the University of Iowa, and he got caught up in a scandal, a betting scandal, and he wasn't really involved in it, but he was thrown out of school, and the NBA barred him for life, even though there wasn't enough evidence that he should have been barred for life. He ended up signing with the American Basketball League, a league that gave us the three-point play and George Steinbrenner as an owner. George actually tried to trade for Connie. Connie was playing in Pittsburgh. George owned the Cleveland franchise. And he talked to Connie one day. He says, look, I think I want to trade for you. I'm going to trade my entire roster for you if Pittsburgh says yes. And Connie said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And George said, no, you're the best player in the league and probably the best player in basketball. I want you. And he said, who are you going to fill the roster with? Who are going to be the other four guys? The deal was never made, but it gave you an insight into George Steinbrenner's sports thinking, which, of course, he showed to the world when he was the Yankees owner between 73 and his death in 2010. But anyway, so Connie Hawkins played in the American Basketball League. That league folded, and he ended up playing with the Harlem Globetrotters for years and years and years. And then the American Basketball Association started. They took him, even though he was a band player, along with Roger Brown. By the way, Roger Brown is the only band player ever in NBA history to be a Hall of Famer because he never played in the NBA. He played his entire career in the American Basketball Association. That's a bit of trivia for you. But anyway, Hawkins played in Pittsburgh and then played in Minneapolis and wanted to go to the NBA, and he couldn't find any real way of getting into the NBA except one of the lawyers for the Phoenix Suns said, hey, you know what? Why don't I contact Connie Hawkins, and why don't we file an antitrust suit against the National Basketball Association for depriving Connie Hawkins his rights? And all of a sudden, here's a court case, and guess what? It never went to court. Connie Hawkins was all of a sudden approved by the National Basketball Association, and he was in Phoenix, and he made that team competitive. He left the American Basketball Association and ended up with the Phoenix Suns, had a pretty good career with the Phoenix Suns. And a note to all basketball fans who think that Donald Sterling is the devil and the Wicked Witch is dead, I don't think Donald Sterling would fare poorly if he went to court with the NBA, given what I know about Connie Hawkins and other things. But that was an inside job. The Phoenix Suns suggested to Connie sue the NBA. And so anyway, that's the backdrop to the 1969 coin flip. And by the 1980s, there was a coin flip, and Houston had the two best players out of college by that point, Ralph Sampson and Olajuwon. And the NBA decided to try something different so teams wouldn't tank at the end of the season trying to get that number one draft pick.
Yeah, players are not able to play basketball until one and done in the college basketball, as the players cannot be 18 to play, as they had that Haywood versus the National Basketball Association back in 1971. Are you for or against players being able not to come out of high school, or perhaps before high school, to play in the NBA?
Well, see, I don't look at it as a sports fan, and a lot of things I look at in sports. Sports fans have a rather peculiar look at sports. They don't think it's part of the real world, whereas I look at it because I have covered strikes, I have covered lockouts, I've been in courtrooms watching leagues defend themselves and losing. I've seen arbitration cases, leagues defending themselves and lose. So when I look at sports, I don't have that emotional attachment to dirty laundry, as Jerry Seinfeld would say, the dirty laundry being the logo of the team and the uniform of the team. And essentially, all sports fans root for dirty laundry. They root for a logo. And I don't look at it that way. I look at it from a business side. And David Stern and I talked about this, probably 8-9 years ago, about David didn't want 18-year-olds in the National Basketball Association. Didn't care where they went. He did care. He wanted them to go to college for a year and develop their game. My feeling is if an 18-year-old can be a soldier and go to Afghanistan and go to Iraq and go wherever the U.S. military sends that 18-year-old, then they could sit on the bench and watch an NBA game as they develop into professional basketball players. What's the worst thing they're going to do is accidentally get kicked by a Knicks City dancer if a routine gets too close to a bench while they're sitting there. The problem, see, the thing is, Again, in sports, in a lot of sports, there's a lot of fabrication and there's a lot of myth-making. And the myth-making is, well, 18-year-olds aren't mature enough to go to the NBA, that they should be in college developing, or maybe in Europe developing, anywhere but the NBA to develop. That's the myth. The reality is this. The way the entry contracts are written, it's a 3-year or 4-year deal. So if you get an 18-year-old, and the best example of all of this is Jermaine O'Neal, who has had a very, very, very successful career as we have moved on into the 19-teens. But when he was drafted as a high school kid out of college, he was not very successful with the Portland Trailblazers. And they had him on a 4-year deal when he was 18, 19, 20, 21. When you're 21 years old and you're an NBA player or a basketball player, they really don't know quite yet how you're going to develop into your 30s. You might end up being a total bust, or you might become Jermaine O'Neal and become a very good player in the right situation. But NBA owners did not want to pay for research and development. They would rather see an 18-year-old in college where he's playing under a coach and he's playing in pressure situations, and they don't have to pay for that research. You know, they have scouts, obviously, but you and I could scout with all the TV going on right now. But they do have scouts, but they don't have to worry about the development. Somebody else is developing that player. So if you move back a kid from 18 to 19 and you do the 3 or 4 year contract, the contract 19, 20, 21, 22, you know pretty much what kind of player you have at 22, and that next contract, you could judge on the fact that this kid is developed and this is where you could slot it in. O'Neal did not develop until he was about 22, so the second contract with him was still a big contract because you rolled the dice and whether or not he was going to develop. It's all about money. Everything about the NBA is always about money. It's nothing else, absolutely nothing else. And it's just the way it is. When you look at the NBA, they don't want to spend money on an 18-year-old when somebody else will spend that money on an 18-year-old, will develop it. So there's a lot of mythology, and that was told to me by an owner, by the way. That was not told to me by David Stern, and it's not the theory that I've come up with. The one-and-done rule is there to help the NBA in research and development. It's not there. It's absolutely not there for the mythology that the kid isn't mature enough to play as an 18-year-old. Hey, if a kid is mature enough to go serve in the military in Iraq and Afghanistan, then a kid is mature enough to play in the NBA. And I understand they'll say, well, we're throwing all this money and he's in with a bad crowd and he's not mature enough. You tell me how much a kid matures between 18 and 19, particularly if he's a college basketball star who's pampered in college.
And does this somewhat violate any laws, like antitrust laws, with the 18-year-old cannot play in the NBA?
Yeah, well, the whole draft. If you look at the whole draft, whether it's the NFL draft or the NBA draft, it is a violation of antitrust laws. Now, it's not the age. I've talked about the age, but if you think of it this way, you're getting out of college. You're leaving college. You know, say you're Bill Gates, okay? Say you're Bill Gates. Let's take Bill Gates for a ludicrous example, but we'll take him anyway. When Bill Gates gets out of college, suppose he's not there developing Microsoft. Suppose he's another guy who leaves college and he's looking for a job. And he's out of Harvard, so obviously he's a smart guy, and a lot of businesses want him. But he's only told that he can go to talk to just one business in one area of the country. And that one business is where he has to be employed for at least 3 years. He does not have an option, even an option, of applying to another company, asking for an interview. But this is what you're doing to people coming out of college for the NBA and for the NFL. Now, in the National Hockey League, they do draft 18-year-olds. If you're not signed by 20, you go back in the draft. You could be drafted again. In baseball, you could be drafted out of high school. You could be drafted 3 years out of college or 4 years out of college. So you have some flexibility here. But if you don't, particularly in the NFL, where are you going to go? You could go to the Canadian Football League, but they're not really going to pay you much money. Or you can play semi-pro football. There's no minor league football operation in the United States. In the NBA, you have some choice. You could go to Europe. You could go to Turkey. You could go to China and play basketball. You can play basketball wherever you want around the world, but you're not going to get compensated like you would in the NBA. You have a bit more of a choice, but you're basically told if you're the top 2 or 3 or 4 people, you're going to go to this place and you're going to like it and don't say anything about it. You look at the NFL, Eli Manning somehow got traded to the New York Giants after being drafted by the San Diego Chargers. John Elway didn't want to play for Frank Kush with the Baltimore Colts and somehow ended up with the Denver Broncos. Bo Jackson didn't want to play with the Tampa Bay Bucks, but Bo Jackson played baseball, so he signed a baseball contract instead of playing with the Bucks. In the NBA's case, there's been no freedom for any rookies since 1975. That was the last year of the NBA and ABA drafting college players or even high school players, because Moses Malone came out of high school. I'm not even sure he was drafted. I think they just signed him back then. NFL, there's so few. Tom Cousineau ended up with the Montreal Alouettes, but the draft is essentially illegal. But under United States work laws, the owners and the employees being the players, can come up and craft an agreement for entry level, for people coming in on the entry level requirements, and that's how they get away with it, through the collective bargaining agreement.
And there was cases back, such as the NFL's Maurice Clarett trying to sue the NFL because of the age ban. And do you see that ever happening again with a college player or a high school player, perhaps, trying to sue the NBA for the age ban?
Well, the problem is that if you're a college player, you need to play in college. If you try to sue, you might be able to move ahead, but you lose that eligibility time, which you need to play and show yourself. It may be a 2 or 3 year process, so it isn't worth it. It's got to be the players' associations that basically change things. And in every collective bargaining agreement, particularly in the NBA, the first thing you see them say is, well, the college draft has to go. The draft has to go, and they use it as a bargaining chip, bargaining leverage. I know that if you were in that position, now, of course, you're talking about first-round picks getting millions of dollars in the NBA and guaranteed contracts. You're talking about, in the NFL, an enormous amount of bonus money for the first and second-round people. So economically, they do okay. But think of this. If, I don't know, say LeBron James, okay, because he's been the best player to come out of high school, even high school, in the last 11 years, something like that. What kind of bidding war do you think would have taken place for LeBron James coming out of high school?
Oh, it would have been ridiculous for him.
So who is it protecting the draft? Is it protecting the athlete, or is it protecting the ownership group?
Oh, the ownership group.
Yeah, because they don't have to bid. They can just slot people in. This is the slot, that's the slot, that's the slot, that's the slot. When the American Football League and the National Football League merged, there were some grumblings because the players back in 1966, they were okay, but the college players coming in all of a sudden lost all of their leverage. When the NBA and the ABA amalgamated after 1976, again, the leverage was gone. When the NHL and WHA came up with the quote-unquote expansion, the leverage was gone. The baseball leverage is, I could get a college scholarship, hope I don't blow out my arm if I'm a pitcher in 3 years, and maybe get better and get more money, or I'll sign now. I mean, it's the gamble every kid takes when drafted at 18 in Major League Baseball. And for for the ownership group, they don't want to really invest money. They do not want to get into bidding wars over players, which you've seen. Back in 1965, which was the final straw between the American Football League and the National Football League, NBC all of a sudden gave the American Football League money, and they went out and they signed Joe Namath for $400,000, and the salaries went up and up and up. And the Namath contract was 3 years for $127,000 a year, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the owners, they call the shots. And, of course, they give other perks to the players. They give them huge salaries and let them become free agents after 3 or 4 years or whatever it is. But the owners do not want to get into that initial bidding war for talent coming out of high school and college. But if you look at it, giving you the Bill Gates example, it's essentially illegal.
And Adam Silver, the commissioner currently in the NBA, says he wants players perhaps have 2 years in college, maybe wait until they're 21. What is the problem with this, with the NBA lottery?
Well, they would get a player more developed, and they would basically, it all comes down to dollars and cents again. They'd get a more developed player, or they'd get a player that they know has limitations, somewhere in that neighborhood. But they wouldn't have to do major investing in the second contract, because the second contract, they know what the player is going to be for the rest of his life. And so it saves them money. Again, it comes down to economics. Now, I know sports fans do not want to hear this, because sports fans have this, they look at sports as some sort of mythical, sacred object, and they don't look at it in real-world time, in real-world terms, and in facts-based reality. Because, they dream, hey, we're going to get this player for our team, we're going to get that player for our team. It's all about economics, and the later you get a guy coming out of college, the more you're assured that you're going to get a player that you could fit in to a system or into a money system and know exactly how much you're going to pay this guy, instead of the unknown, which is an 18 or 19-year-old.
Yeah, for the deadline for the NBA for the draft, it has to be before April 15th. April 27th is the deadline to declare for the NBA draft, and the NBA lottery is May 20th. It's only a full 62 days before the NBA requires them to do so. Should they perhaps change the deadline for certain dates for players to declare?
Well, players could opt out after they declare. Mm-hmm. That's not a problem. I mean, the whole problem is the whole basketball industry. That is the whole problem. And it comes down to money. And in terms of all the money that's out there, players want the money. The owners want to not pay the players if they don't feel that the players are basically earning their money, their big dollars. So it's all about money. If a player feels confident enough to make the NBA, he'll go. The second round guarantees you absolutely nothing. If you draft in the second round, no guaranteed contract. You could be out, or and then you could second guess yourself and say, "Well, I should have spent time in college." But if you look at Greg Oden, he was going to be the guy, right? Remember he and Durant coming out, and he was going to be the guy, and he broke his leg. And how many millions of dollars has he lost out on because he broke his leg playing basketball and never recovered?
And one thing they say about the NCAA, it's not a centralized governing body. Rather, the NCAA is truly a membership, and it really doesn't help out the players that much. It is why the reason for a union for players is going to maybe perhaps start to protect these players, as they're not really making any money if they have to stay in college a little bit longer.
Well, the whole college sports myth is bought into by people, student athletes. Student athletes developed because Ray Dennison got killed at Fort Lewis College in Colorado during a football game on the opening kickoff. And the family sued for workman's compensation. And the judge said, well, he's not really a worker. He's just playing sports. It's an extracurricular activity. And that's how student athletes came about. It's a ruse, more or less, to protect colleges from paying workman's compensation. And they've lived on that. I mean, look, you go to high school, you get out of high school, you sign a scholarship agreement. It's a year-to-year agreement. It's not a 4-year agreement. Doesn't pay the full freight. Coaches, you're at the coach's whim. They could cut you at any time. You got to go to involuntary practice to impress a coach. Secondarily, you are a student. If you could get something out of it, that's great. If you can't, well, you're there to wreck your body for Alma Mater University. The contract student signs with the school is all in favor of the college. And you're seeing breaks in the armor right now. The O'Bannon case goes to court, I believe, on June 9th, that the NCAA can claim in perpetuity that they have your face, they own your face, they own your name on video games in perpetuity, which the O'Bannon lawsuit says is not the case. The unionization is there to protect the athletes, I guess. I'm not even sure how the unionization would work. And already you got some states who are saying college players can't be employees of a college, as in Ohio. Then you're going to have the right to work states, which are going to say, well, they can't be employees of a college. So, you know, it's a slippery slope there, too. And you got John Skipper at ESPN, who's vehemently against paying players. Why the head of a TV network should care about college sports is beyond me, except when you look at ESPN as the partner of college sports and is paying all this money to college programs. Then you got states around the country where the highest paid state employee is either the college football coach or the college basketball coach, but they don't want to pay the players. And education seems to be secondary, even though you got Mark Emmert and others saying, well, education is our top priority. And I could say bold to that, because when Emmert was at Penn State announcing the sanctions that Penn State agreed to with the NCAA after the Sandusky case, while he was talking about football must not be the number come play with them. So, you know, again, there's a lot of mythology out of there, but it's just a business. And it's just a business, and at the end of the day, all that counts is the bottom line. And so you get the labor, which are the players, the stars of the show, and you pay them next to nothing. You're paying them a college scholarship. And there are people who talk about, oh, well, you know, they're getting paid a college scholarship. Well, they're being hired by the university, and they're not being educated. They're there to play football, to play basketball, to play other sports. Football and basketball graduation numbers are way down. You know, Columbia University just won, I believe, the NCAA golf tournament. Now when the NCAA talks about college graduation rates of students, they include all the athletes, including the golf and the tennis. And, you know, look at it. John McEnroe played at Stanford. Smart guy. Tiger Woods played at Stanford. Smart guy. Both dropped out. Even smarter because they knew they were going to make a lot of money. In fact, I'll tell you the reason why Tiger Woods dropped out of Stanford, and it's because of the NCAA.
With all the changes that's been happening with the NBA lottery since 1966, even before then, and with the legalities, with the players not being able to play until they're after 18, what are some of the changes that you would make and perhaps fix the NBA lottery and the draft?
Well, the NBA lottery is a game show, and it draws in people to watch, and it makes things interesting, so they're not going to change that. Maybe tweak it a little bit, but they're really not going to change that. Because Adam Silver was the head of NBA Entertainment. Think of that, entertainment. Then he worked as a deputy commissioner, now commissioner. entertainment. It's disposable entertainment. I'm sure if you ask most people who played in this year's Super Bowl, they have no idea.
That is the truth.
They have absolutely no idea that who played in this year's Super Bowl, because it comes and goes. It's just an entertainment show. So that's all it is an entertainment show. Do you know who played in this year's Super Bowl?
The Seahawks and the Broncos.
There you go. You're one of the few who probably know. But anyway, it's entertainment. It's the owner's game. It's their rules. Jimmy Devellano, who had great success as a talent evaluator for the New York Islanders and then the Detroit Red Wings, has about 7 or 8 or 9 Stanley Cup rings. I forgot how many he has. But he has quite a few. During the NHL lockout of a couple of years ago, he had the very simplest terms you could have to describe sports, and he was absolutely correct. And he got fined $250,000 by NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman for speaking his mind during the lockout. And basically, Devellano said this: the owners or ranchers, the players are the cattle, and they are allowed to visit the ranch. And basically what he said was simple. It's the owner's game. It's their rules. It's their arenas. It's their TV contracts. Players come and go, but the owners put up the money, and they're the guys who make all the rules. So they're going to make the rules. They agreed to the NBA draft lottery after the coin flip. Hey, they've probably agreed to throw out Donald Sterling because he hurt their revenue streams by having a leaked tape of a private conversation in his living room end up on TMZ's website and then the TV show. And by the way, give Harvey Levin a lot of credit. He is absolutely killed on this story. He has been ahead of the curve. He's beaten all the big shot writers, the Lupicas and Stephen A. Smiths and Skip Baylesses and, all these people who have these reputations. I don't understand why they have these reputations, but they do. And basically, Harvey Levin has just cleaned their clocks on this whole story. And anything, TMZ is not. TMZ is not at all a sports gossip thing. But this year, Deshaun Jackson, Ray Rice, Donald Sterling, they're putting the normal, traditional sports media to shame with what they've been doing lately, which is probably a good thing because the traditional sports media needs to be shaken up. But still, all in all, it's still the owner's game. They're the ones who run it, and unless they decide to change it, nothing is going to change.
Evan, this has been a pleasure talking to you about the NBA lottery and the NBA draft. Thanks again for joining today, and where can everybody find you on the web?
Well, I'm all over the web. Just look me up. I got the 5 books. I never plugged the 5 books. One is the economic history of professional football, which is called Coal Miners, America's Passion from Coal Miners Game to whatever it's called. It's an ebook on Apple, among others. There's a basketball book, same treatment it really starts in 1938, although I have references before 1938, through 1984, when David Stern took over, and that one is an easy one for me to remember. It's from Peach Baskets to Dance Halls to the Not-So-Stern years. And I have 3 other books out there all about the politics and business of sports. One was released in 2005. That one was used by Columbia University as a textbook, among others, and it sits in the Harvard Library. One was released in 2010, and one was just released in 2014. They're all on Apple. They're on Smashwords. They're on Nook. They're in Kobo, and they're all cheap. They're all $2.99. But the publishing industry has changed totally, and so just look me up online, and you can find me.
Awesome, Evan. As always, a great time having you on.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Evan. Have a great one.
Okay, bye-bye.
That was Evan Weiner, sports writer and journalist, award-winning sports writer and journalist, joining us right now talking about the NBA lottery and how it's really become a tainted process for the NBA throughout the years, how it became to become the NBA lottery, and how it's somewhat against the antitrust laws for violating the laws of an 18-year-old of obtaining wages, of working in the workforce. Well, this has been Sports District Radio. I am Ryan Neiman. Follow us on Twitter at Sports District Radio. We're on the web at fsportsu.com. Like us at Facebook at Sports District Radio. I am Ryan Neiman. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.